Chapter 60. Knack. Carisor. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I am very glad that it has not been necessary in all this long correspondence with you to discuss the question of knack. You seem to be specially gifted. You are able to get the results directly from following out the instructions, and I am glad that it is through you, on behalf of other people, to whom you have communicated these instructions, that this letter has become necessary. When O.T.O Morningstar was trying, with indifferent success, to teach me how to play French billiards in Mexico City, I found one particular difficulty, and that was how to play the mass shot. He kept on explaining and explaining and demonstrating, and none of it seemed any good. I understood intellectually well enough, but somehow or other, it never came off. Presently, he said that he guessed he knew what was the matter. Although I had the whole thing perfect in my mind, I had not made the link between my mind, my eye, and my hand. And what I must do was not to go to him for teaching, of which I had already enough and more than enough. He told me if I went on trying, it would happen quite suddenly and unexpectedly one day that I found I could do it. This was particularly decent of him because it was in direct contradiction with his financial interests. But he was an all around good man. So I cut him out so far as the mass shot was concerned, and then redoubled my practice of it. When he said came out right, one day I found that I had acquired the knack of it. Now, with these semi pupils of yours, the same thing probably applies. The point you raise in particular as baffling them is the getting on to the astral plane. It is not much good explaining why the failure occurs or at what point it occurs. The only thing that is any use is for the pupil to go on and on eternally. He must find out for himself where the snag is, and he must continue his experiment until he acquires the knack. All this should be perfectly obvious. The same sort of thing applies to every kind of game which we know. There is a particular knack, for instance, in putting. It is not that your calculations are wrong. It is not that your stance is wrong. It's not that your grip is wrong. It is that for some reason or the other, you fail to coordinate all these various factors in the problem. And sooner or later, the moment comes when it appears to you quite natural to succeed in getting out of the body, or in opening the eyes on the astral plane, or in getting hold of the particular form of elemental energy which has, until that moment, escaped you. I ought incidentally to mention that this sudden illumination, that is not quite the right word, but I cannot think of a better one, is quite different to the sudden confidence which takes hold of one in the yoga practices. The more I think of it, the more I feel that the question of sensitivity is of the greatest importance. In yoga practices, one does not, at least as far as my experience goes, come against the delicacy that one does in all magical and astral practices. The reason for that is, I think, quite obvious. All the yoga practices are ultimately of the protective type, whereas with magic and astral practices, one is exposing oneself to the contact of exterior or apparently exterior forces. In neither case, however, is there any sort of reason at all for discouragement. And as I said above, the cure in all cases is apparently the same. In one way or another, the veil is rent. The pupil becomes the master. And the reason for that is really rather beyond my analysis so far as that has gone at present. I do not know whether it is some kind of awakening of some faculty of the magical self, though that seems to me the simplest and most probable explanation. But in any case, there is no doubt about the nature of the experience, and there can be no difficulty about the recognition of it when it occurs. It reminds me of the story of the psychologist who wanted to judge the difference in temperament between an Englishman, a Scotsman, and an Irishman, in judging the amount of whiskey in a bottle in the next room. They had to go in, report, and come back and tell him what they thought about it. He filled it 50% with great accuracy. The Irishman came back fairly cheerful. He rubbed his hands. Well, there's half a bottle left, Your Honor. When the Scotsman came back, his face was full of gloom. I'm afraid that half of the bottle is gone. Then the Englishman had his turn. He came in all over smiles and rubbing his hands and said, There's not a drop left, so that's that. Moral of the story? Be English. Love is the law. Love under will. Yours fraternally.